The winter of 1852 came early to the Colorado Rockies, bringing with it a fury that even the oldest mountain men hadn't seen in years. Snow fell in thick, relentless sheets, burying the pine forests under a white shroud that stretched as far as the eye could see. The wind howled through the canyons like a wounded animal, carrying with it the bite of death that could claim a man in hours if he wasn't careful. Josiah McKenna pulled his buffalo coat tighter around his shoulders as he trudged through the knee-deep snow, his breath forming clouds of vapor in the frigid air. His weathered face, marked by 37 winters and countless days under the harsh mountain sun, remained stoic against the cold. Ice crystals clung to his dark beard, and his gray eyes, the color of winter storm clouds, scanned the horizon with the practiced vigilance of a man who had learned that survival meant never letting his guard down. He'd been out checking his trap lines since before dawn, moving through the familiar paths he'd carved out over the past 5 years of solitary living. The beaver pelts hanging from his pack would fetch a decent price come spring, but that was months away. For now, it was just him, the mountain, and the endless white silence that had become his only companion. Josiah had chosen this life, or perhaps it had chosen him, after the war with Mexico. After Sarah and little Emma had been taken by the fever, there hadn't been much left for him in the settlements below. The mountains offered something the civilized world couldn't, a place where a man's ghosts couldn't follow quite so closely, where the sharp edge of memory dulled against the daily struggle for survival. His cabin sat nestled in a small clearing, protected on 3 sides by towering rock faces that sheltered it from the worst of the wind. He'd built it himself, log by log, creating a refuge that was sparse but solid. As he approached through the falling snow, something made him stop. There, in the fresh powder near the cliff face, were footprints, small, stumbling, definitely not his own. Josiah's hand moved instinctively to the Colt Navy revolver at his hip. In 5 years, he'd had maybe a dozen visitors, and most of those had been other trappers passing through. These prints were different, lighter, more desperate in their pattern. They led along the base of the cliff, disappearing behind a large boulder. He approached cautiously, every sense alert. The war had taught him that danger often came in unexpected forms, but what he found behind that rock stopped him cold. A woman, barely more than a girl by the look of her, huddled against the stone face. Her dress, once blue calico, was torn and muddied. No coat, just a thin shawl wrapped around shoulders that shook violently with cold. Her blonde hair hung in wet tangles around a face pale as the snow itself. But it was her condition that struck him most forcefully. She was heavily pregnant, her swollen belly evident even through the folds of her dress. Her eyes, when they fluttered open at his approach, were the deep brown of autumn leaves, filled with a terror that went beyond the cold. "Please," she whispered through blue-tinged lips. "Please don't tell them where I am." Before Josiah could respond, her eyes rolled back and she slumped forward. He caught her before she hit the ground, his mind racing. Everything in him that had learned to avoid entanglements, to keep to himself, screamed at him to leave her. But beneath that, older instincts stirred, instincts from before the mountains, before the loss, when he'd been a different man entirely. The weight of her in his arms decided it. She was burning with fever despite the cold, her breath coming in short, labored gasps. To leave her would be murder, plain and simple. With a grunt, he shifted her weight and began the trek back to his cabin. The wind picked up as he walked, driving snow into his face like tiny needles. The woman stirred once, mumbling something he couldn't make out over the storm. By the time he kicked open his cabin door, his muscles burned from the effort and his own breath came hard. Inside, the cabin was dark and cold, the fire having died to embers hours ago. He laid her carefully on his narrow bed, the only bed, and set about rebuilding the fire with practiced efficiency. Soon, orange light flickered across the log walls, and warmth began to creep back into the small space. Josiah studied his unexpected guest in the firelight. Up close, he could see the bruises on her wrists, the healing cut on her lower lip. Her dress was not just torn, but deliberately ripped in places. And her feet, Lord, her feet were wrapped in nothing but rags, bloodied from her flight through the snow. He'd seen enough in his years to recognize the signs. Someone had hurt this woman, and hurt her badly. The kind of hurt that sent a pregnant woman running into a killing storm rather than staying where she was. Working carefully, he removed her wet shoes, what was left of them, and the soaked rags. Her feet were dangerously cold, the toes tinged blue. Frostbite was a real possibility. He fetched water warming by the fire and clean cloths, beginning the slow process of bringing warmth back to her extremities. As he worked, she began to stir, soft moans escaping her lips. Her hand moved protectively to her belly, even in unconsciousness. When her eyes finally opened, focusing on him with difficulty, the fear returned instantly. "Easy," Josiah said, his voice rough from disuse. "You're safe, just warming your feet before you lose them to the cold." She tried to pull away, but weakness kept her still. "Who? Where am I?" "Name's Josiah McKenna. This is my cabin, about 15 miles up from Beaver Creek. Found you by the cliff face." He continued his ministrations, gentle despite his calloused hands. "What's your name?" She hesitated, conflict clear in her eyes. Finally, seeming to decide she had little choice but to trust him, she whispered, "Mary. Mary Catherine Walsh." "Well, Mary Catherine, you're half frozen and burning with fever. How long were you out in that storm?" I don't know. Since yesterday morning. Maybe I lost track." Her voice cracked, and tears began to flow. "I had to run. He was going to kill me this time. I know it." Josiah didn't need to ask who he was. The story was written in her bruises, in her desperation. He'd seen it before. Back in the settlements, men who treated their wives like property, like something to own and break at will. "No one's going to hurt you here," he said quietly. "Storm's too bad for anyone to be tracking, and even if they tried, they'd never make it up the mountain in this weather." As if to emphasize his point, the wind suddenly gusted hard enough to rattle the thick wooden door. Outside, the storm was becoming a full blizzard, the kind that could last for days and bury whole valleys. Mary's hand clutched at her belly suddenly, her face contorting in pain. "The baby," she gasped. "It's not supposed to come for another month." Josiah felt his heart sink. A pregnant woman, fleeing abuse, caught in a blizzard, and now this. He may have been many things, but a midwife wasn't one of them. Still, he kept his voice steady. "Might just be the strain. You rest now. I'll make some tea. Get some food in you." He moved to his supplies, pulling out dried herbs he kept for medicinal purposes. His mother had taught him about plants. Years ago in another lifetime. Willow bark for fever, chamomile for calming, raspberry leaf for... He paused, remembering. Raspberry leaf for pregnancy troubles. As he worked, he heard her soft sobs behind him. Not just from pain, he realized, but from release. Perhaps for the first time in God knows how long. She was somewhere her husband couldn't reach her. Outside, the storm raged on, sealing them into their own small world. The mountains, in their harsh mercy, had provided sanctuary. But Josiah knew that morning would come eventually, and with it, decisions that would need to be made. For now, though, there was only the fire, the storm, and two broken souls finding unexpected shelter in each other's company. The medicinal tea steamed in the tin cup as Josiah carried it carefully to the bed. Mary had drifted in and out of consciousness for the past hour, her fever spiking despite his efforts. He'd seen fever take strong men in the war, but watching this young woman fight it while carrying a child stirred something in him he'd thought long buried. "Here," he said softly, helping her sit up against the rough wool blankets he'd piled behind her. "Sip this slow. It'll help with the fever." Mary's hands shook as she took the cup, and he had to steady it for her. The first sip made her grimace. Willow bark tea was bitter as sin, but she drank it down obediently. In the firelight, he could see her better now. She couldn't be more than 22, 23 at most, too young to have eyes that held such fear. Thank you, she whispered, then stronger. Thank you, Mr. McKenna. Josiah, he corrected. No need for formalities up here. She nodded, then winced as another cramp seized her. When it passed, she looked at him with those autumn eyes, studying his face as if trying to decide how much to trust. You live here alone? 5 years now. He took the empty cup, refilling it with plain hot water this time. Trap beaver, hunt elk, trade pelts down in Beaver Creek come spring. 5 years, she repeated softly. That's a long time to be alone. Josiah shrugged, uncomfortable with the direction of her thoughts. Mountain life suits some men. He paused, then added, You said you ran from your husband. The fear returned instantly to her face, her whole body tensing. Thomas Walsh. He owns the general store in Cedar Ridge, about 40 miles south of here. Her voice grew bitter. Owns the store, owns half the town, owns me, or so he believes. How long you been married? 2 years. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. My father owed him money, gambling debts. Thomas offered to forgive them if... She trailed off, her hand moving unconsciously to her belly. I was 17. Josiah felt his jaw tighten. He'd known men like this Thomas Walsh, had served with some in the war, men who took what they wanted because they could, who saw strength as permission for cruelty. The baby, he asked quietly. His, though he doubts it, her voice turned hard. Says I'm a whore, that I've been with other men, as if I could, when he watches my every move. Counts every minute I'm away from the house. She met his eyes directly. I've never been with anyone but him, Mr. McKenna, Josiah. Not that it matters to him. He just likes having reasons to... She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. The bruises told the rest of the story. What made you run now? Josiah asked, adding more wood to the fire. Outside, the wind had become a constant roar, like a great beast prowling around the cabin. Mary was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. He came home drunk 3 nights ago. Said he'd decided the baby wasn't his, that he wasn't going to raise another man's bastard. Said after it was born, he'd take care of the problem. Josiah's hand stilled on the firewood. He threatened the baby. Not threatened, promised. Tears ran down her cheeks now. I've taken his fists, his belt, I've taken it all for 2 years, but my baby, I couldn't let him hurt my baby. So you ran. Yesterday morning. He'd gone to the saloon early, Sunday or not. Tom Walsh drinks when he pleases. I took what little money I could find, wrapped my feet best I could, and ran. She looked toward the door, where the storm raged beyond. I knew about the storm coming. Everyone did. But I figured freezing to death was better than watching him kill my child. A long silence settled between them, broken only by the crack of the fire and the howl of the wind. Josiah found himself thinking of Sarah, of how she'd looked when she was carrying Emma, the joy in her face, the way she'd hum while doing chores, one hand always resting protective on her growing belly. So different from the terror in Mary's eyes. You know he'll come looking, Mary said finally. Thomas doesn't like losing what he considers his property. Let him come. The words came out harder than Josiah intended. Mountains got ways of dealing with men like that. Mary studied him again, seeming to see something new. You were a soldier. It wasn't a question, but he nodded anyway. Cavalry. Fought in Mexico under Colonel Donovan. Is that where you learned to be so gentle with your hands? The question caught him off guard. He looked down at his hands, scarred, calloused things that had held rifles and set traps and built this cabin log by log. Gentle wasn't a word he'd have used. Had a wife once, he found himself saying. Sarah. She taught me that strength didn't always mean hardness. He stood abruptly, uncomfortable with the memories. You need food. When's the last time you ate? I don't remember. Yesterday morning, maybe. He busied himself at the small stove, heating the venison stew he'd made 2 days ago. It was simple fare meat, wild onions, cattail roots, but it would fill her belly and give her strength. As he worked, he was aware of her watching him, this strange woman who'd literally fallen into his solitary life. "Can I ask what happened to her? Your wife?" Josiah's hands paused on the ladle. "Fever took her. Her and our daughter Emma, 4 years old. Emma was—" He served the stew into a wooden bowl, his voice carefully neutral. "That was 6 years ago. I'm sorry. Long time passed." He handed her the bowl. "Eat slow. Your stomach's been empty too long." She ate carefully, savoring each bite like it might be her last. Between spoonfuls, she asked, "Is that why you came to the mountains? To get away from the memories?" "Partly." He settled into the rough chair near the fire. "Partly because after they died, the world down there stopped making sense. Up here, things are simple. Survive the winter. Hunt in summer. No complications. Until I showed up. Until you showed up." He agreed. Another cramp seized her then, causing her to nearly drop the bowl. This one lasted longer, and when it passed, she was panting. "It's getting worse," she gasped. Josiah took the bowl, setting it aside. He'd delivered calves and foals, even helped a Ute woman birth her baby once when her tribe had camped near his trap lines. But this felt different. This felt like responsibility he wasn't sure he could shoulder. "Storm's not letting up," he said. "No way to get you down to Cedar Creek, even if we tried." "I don't want to go to Cedar Creek," Mary said quickly. "Thomas has friends there. They'd send word to him. Then we handle this here." He tried to sound more confident than he felt. "Women have been birthing babies in harder places than this for thousands of years." She grabbed his hand suddenly, her grip surprisingly strong. "If something happens to me, promise me you'll take care of the baby, get it somewhere safe, somewhere Thomas can't find it. Nothing's going to happen to you. Promise me." Her eyes burned with desperate intensity. "Please." Josiah looked at this young woman, beaten down but not broken, running through a killing storm to save her unborn child. He thought of Sarah, of Emma, of all the promises he hadn't been able to keep. "I promise," he said quietly. She relaxed slightly, releasing his hand. Outside, something crashed, probably a tree branch breaking under the weight of snow. The storm was getting worse, sealing them in completely. Whatever was going to happen, they'd face it alone. As if hearing his thoughts, Mary said, "I'm glad it was your tracks I followed. Another man might have left me to freeze. Another man might have had more sense." Josiah replied, but there was no heat in it. She smiled then, the first real smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, giving him a glimpse of who she might have been before Thomas Walsh got his hands on her. Maybe, but sense isn't always what we need most. The wind howled louder, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf answered its call. The night was deepening, and with it, the certainty that by morning, everything would be different. For now, though, there was just the fire's warmth, the storm's fury, and 2 damaged souls finding unexpected comfort in shared shelter. The night deepened with a weight that pressed against the cabin walls. Josiah had lost track of time. It could have been midnight or nearing dawn. The storm made everything a perpetual twilight. He'd kept the fire burning steady, feeding it with the careful economy of a man who knew winter's appetite for wood. Mary had dozed fitfully for a while, but now she was awake again, her breathing shallow and quick. The contractions were coming more frequently, each one drawing a soft moan from her lips despite her efforts to stay quiet. "Don't hold back on my account," Josiah said from where he sat preparing clean cloths and heating water. "Ain't nobody to hear you but me and the wind." She managed a weak smile. "Thomas always said I was too loud. Made too much fuss about nothing." Another contraction hit, and this time she did cry out, her hands clutching the blankets. Josiah moved to her side, letting her grip his hand. Her fingers were small but strong, strengthened perhaps by years of hard work in her husband's store. When the pain passed, she lay panting, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cold pressing in from outside. "Tell me about the mountains," she said suddenly. "Tell me what it's like in spring." He understood her need for distraction, for something beyond the pain and fear. Spring comes late up here, he began, his voice taking on the rhythm of a story. First sign is the sound, the ice breaking up in the creeks, making music like nothing you've heard. Then the meadow starts showing through the snow, just patches at first, brown and muddy. Another contraction. He kept talking through it, letting his voice be an anchor. But then the wildflowers come. Columbine and Indian paintbrush, larkspur and mountain iris. Whole meadows turn purple and red and yellow, like God spilled his paint box across the mountains. The elk come down from the high country, and the bears wake up hungry and grumbling. Sounds beautiful? Mary whispered when she could speak again. It is. Sarah always said. He stopped himself, but Mary squeezed his hand. Tell me about her. Please, I'd like to know about a woman who was loved properly. Josiah was quiet for a moment, then began. Met her in Independence, Missouri. I was just back from the war, full of myself and my cavalry uniform. She was working in her father's dry goods store, had this way of putting young soldiers in their place with just a look. He smiled at the memory. Took me 3 months just to get her to walk out with me. But she did. She did. Said later she felt sorry for me. Moon-eyed fool that I was. The wind gusted hard, rattling the door, and he got up to check the latch before continuing. We married in '48. Emma came a year later. Prettiest baby you ever saw, though I suppose all fathers say that. Mary's face contorted with another pain, longer this time. When it eased, she was trembling. How did you bear it? Losing them? Didn't, at first. Damn near put my gun in my mouth more than once. He said it matter-of-factly, the way a man might mention the weather. But Sarah wouldn't have wanted that. So I came up here instead. Figured the mountains would kill me or cure me. They did neither. Just taught me to live with it. The moon broke through the storm clouds for a moment, sending silver light through the cabin's single window. In that light, Mary's face looked ethereal, otherworldly. Then another contraction hit, and she was very much of this world, crying out in primal pain. It's time, she gasped. The baby's coming. Josiah had known it was coming, but the reality of it still hit him like a physical blow. All right, he said, forcing calm into his voice. All right, we're ready for this. He wasn't ready. Not really. But he'd learned in the war that sometimes you had to act ready even when your insides were churning. He helped her shift position, piling more blankets behind her, arranging things as best he could remember from that time with the Ute woman. I'm scared, Mary admitted, tears mixing with the sweat on her face. I know, but you're stronger than you know. Any woman who'd run into a blizzard to save her baby has strength most folks can't imagine. The next hour blurred together, contractions coming wave after wave, Mary's cries mixing with the storm's howl. Josiah moving between encouragement and practical preparation. The fire crackled and spat, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. Outside, the wind had reached a fever pitch, as if nature itself was participating in this ancient drama. I can see the head, Josiah said, trying to keep the wonder out of his voice. Dark hair, matted with birth fluids. A tiny human emerging into this harsh world. Mary bore down with a strength that amazed him, her face set with fierce determination. This young woman who'd been beaten and broken was now a force of nature herself, bringing life forth through sheer will. One more push, he encouraged. Just one more. The baby slipped free in a rush of fluid and blood. Tiny and perfect and absolutely still. Josiah's heart stopped. The baby wasn't breathing, wasn't crying. Its skin had a bluish tinge that sent ice through his veins. What's wrong? Mary gasped. Why isn't it crying? Josiah didn't answer. Instead, he acted on instinct, clearing the baby's mouth and nose, rubbing its back the way he'd seen done with calves who came out still. Nothing. The cabin felt suddenly cold despite the fire. Please, Mary sobbed. Please. He turned the baby over, this impossibly small person, and gave a sharp tap between its shoulder blades. Once, twice. On the third tap, the baby gasped, then let out a thin, reedy wail that was the most beautiful sound Josiah had heard in 6 years. "There we go," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "There we go, little one." He cleaned the baby quickly, efficiently, then wrapped it in the softest cloth he had, an old flannel shirt that had been Sarah's favorite. Only then did he check a girl, tiny but perfect, with her mother's delicate features and a shock of dark hair. "You have a daughter," he said, placing the bundle in Mary's arms. Mary looked down at her child with an expression of such fierce love that Josiah had to turn away. It was too private, too pure for his eyes. He busied himself with the aftermath of birth, the practical matters that needed tending. "She's so small," Mary whispered. "Is she all right? She's so quiet now." Josiah looked at the baby, who had stopped crying and was now staring up at her mother with dark, unfocused eyes. "She's perfect, just taking it all in. It's a lot, being born, in a mountain man's cabin in the middle of a blizzard," Mary added with a weak laugh. "What a story she'll have. If she lives to tell it," Josiah thought but didn't say. The baby was small, probably early as Mary had said, and they were far from any doctor, trapped by a storm that showed no signs of breaking. "What will you name her?" he asked instead. Mary was quiet for a long moment, studying her daughter's face. "Hope," she said finally. "Hope Sarah McKenna." Josiah's hand stilled. "Mary, she wouldn't be here without you. Neither of us would." Mary's eyes met his, steady and sure despite her exhaustion. "If you don't mind, that is, I know we're nothing to you, just strangers who stumbled into your life. But you're not nothing," Josiah said quietly. He thought of the promise he'd made, the weight of it settling on his shoulders like snow on pine branches. "You're not strangers anymore either." The baby, Hope, made a small sound, not quite a cry, more like a questioning chirp. Mary adjusted her hold, and instinctively, the baby began to nurse, life asserting itself, Josiah thought, life pushing forward despite all odds. The wind had finally begun to die down, exhausted perhaps by its own fury. Through the window, the faintest hint of dawn touched the sky, not true light yet, just a lessening of the absolute dark. They had survived the night, all 3 of them. "You should rest," Josiah said. "Both of you. I'll keep watch." "Watch for what?" Mary asked drowsily, already being pulled toward sleep by exhaustion and the warmth of her baby against her chest. "For wolves," Josiah thought. "For fever. For Thomas Walsh. For all the dangers that dawn might bring to this fragile new life." "Just watching," he said. "Rest now," as Mary drifted off, still cradling Hope. Josiah added more wood to the fire and settled into his chair. Outside, the storm was breaking apart, revealing stars between the racing clouds. He thought of his own words to Mary, that the mountains would kill you or cure you. Looking at the mother and child sleeping in his bed, he wondered if perhaps the mountains had a third option. Perhaps they could teach you to live again, to hope again, even when you thought that part of you had died in a grave in Missouri. The baby stirred, making soft sounds, and Josiah found himself humming, an old lullaby Sarah used to sing to Emma. The words were lost, but the melody remained, carried on the dying wind and the crackling fire, a bridge between what was lost and what might yet be found. Dawn crept across the mountains like a cautious animal, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of rose and gold. The storm had finally exhausted itself, leaving behind a world transformed, pristine, silent, and achingly beautiful. Josiah stood at the window, watching the light grow stronger, his breath fogging the cold glass. Behind him, Hope's thin cry broke the morning stillness. He turned to see Mary stirring, automatically reaching for her daughter even before her eyes opened fully. The sight struck him with unexpected force, this primal response of mother to child, unchanged by circumstance or hardship. "Morning," he said softly, moving to stoke the fire that had burned low during the last hours of night. Mary's eyes focused on him, confusion clearing as memory returned. "We made it through the night." "You did, both of you." He filled the kettle with fresh snow from just outside the door, the cold air sharp as broken glass against his face. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been trampled by a team of horses," she admitted, then looked down at Hope with wonder. "But she's here. She's really here." The baby was awake now, her dark eyes moving without focus, tiny fists waving in the air. In the growing light, Josiah could see her more clearly, the delicate shell of her ears, the perfect miniature fingernails, the way her mouth worked even when she wasn't nursing, life in its most fragile and persistent form. "She needs to stay warm," he said, bringing over another blanket, the thick buffalo hide he usually saved for the coldest nights. "Babies this small, born early like she was, they have trouble holding heat." Mary looked at him with curiosity. "You know about babies." "Some. Helped birth foals and calves mostly, but—" He paused, remembering. "There was a winter when I was 12. Blizzard caught our neighbor's wife in labor. My mother went to help. Took me along in case she needed someone to ride for the doctor. Baby came before we could even think about leaving. Watched my mother work. Learned what I could. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She knew about herbs, healing, said every person should know how to help bring life into the world, not just take it out." The irony of those words, spoken years before he'd go to war, wasn't lost on him. Hope began to fuss more insistently, and Mary tried to nurse her again, wincing at the effort. Everything was still raw, still painful. Josiah busied himself making breakfast, simple fare, but nourishing. Cornmeal mush with a bit of honey he'd traded for last fall, some dried berries, strong coffee for himself, and herb tea for her. "I keep thinking I'll wake up," Mary said quietly as she ate one-handed. Hope cradled in her other arm. "That I'll be back in that house, with Thomas standing over me, telling me I was foolish to think I could leave." "You're not going back," Josiah said, the words coming out more forcefully than he intended. She looked at him, something shifting in her expression. "He'll come looking, when the storm clears enough for travel. He's probably already got men ready to ride. Thomas doesn't like losing his possessions." "You're not a possession. Try telling him that." She adjusted Hope's position, the baby making small sounds of contentment. "He bought me fair and square. He'd say, paid my father's debts, gave him extra besides. In his mind, that makes me his until death." Josiah felt the old anger rising, the kind he'd felt in the war when he'd seen men abuse their power. But this was different. This was personal in a way that surprised him. "Death might come sooner than he thinks if he shows up here," he said quietly. Mary studied his face. "You'd kill for us? For strangers?" "You're not strangers anymore." He repeated his words from the night. "And any man who'd threaten a baby." He didn't finish. Didn't need to. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and Hope's occasional coos. Outside, the sun climbed higher, revealing the extent of the storm's work. Drifts reached halfway up the cabin walls, and several trees had fallen under the weight of snow. The world was remade, clean and dangerous. "Tell me about this life," Mary said eventually. "This mountain life. What's it really like?" Josiah considered the question. How to explain the solitude that was both burden and blessing. The way the mountains could make you feel both infinitely small and part of something infinitely large. "Quiet, mostly," he said. "You learn to hear things city folks miss. The way snow sounds different when a storm's coming. How elk move through the forest like ghosts. Which birds mean danger and which mean fair weather." He paused, adding, "You learn to be comfortable with your own thoughts, or go mad from them. Which are you?" "Jury's still out on that one." She smiled, a real smile that transformed her tired face. "I don't think madmen make such gentle midwives." Hope chose that moment to spit up, a dribble of milk that had Mary fumbling for a cloth. Josiah handed her one, their fingers brushing in the exchange. Such a simple touch, but it sent an unexpected jolt through him. How long since he'd touched another person with anything approaching tenderness? "She's so tiny," Mary said, cleaning Hope's face with practiced motions that seemed to come naturally. "I'm afraid I'll break her." "You won't. You're already a natural mother." "I had practice," Mary said, then caught herself, pain flashing across her features. Josiah waited, not pushing. "I lost one," she said finally, so quietly he almost missed it. "Last year, Thomas was in one of his rages. I fell down the stairs." She swallowed hard. "He said it was my fault for being clumsy." The rage that filled Josiah was cold and pure as mountain water. He'd known men like Thomas Walsh, but knowing and understanding were different things. How could any man? "I'm sorry," was all he said, but he put the weight of meaning behind it. "That's when I started planning," Mary continued. "Started hiding little bits of money when I could. A penny here, a nickel there. Took me months to save enough for this." She gestured at her meager surroundings, then looked at Hope. "I couldn't lose another one to him." The sun was fully up now, turning the snow-covered clearing into a bowl of diamonds, beautiful and treacherous. The snow would be deep, possibly impassable for days. They were truly cut off from the world, for better or worse. "What was her name?" Josiah asked softly. "The one you lost?" Mary's eyes filled with tears. "I never got to name her. Thomas wouldn't let me, said there was no point naming something that was never meant to be." "Then we'll name her now." Josiah said, "Every child deserves a name." Mary looked at him with such gratitude that he had to look away. "Grace," she whispered. "I would have called her Grace." "Grace Walsh," Josiah said formally, as if speaking to the universe itself. "Sister to Hope, remembered." Mary broke down then, sobbing quietly so as not to disturb Hope. Josiah moved without thinking, sitting on the edge of the bed, letting her lean into his shoulder. She smelled of sweat and birth and the faint lavender she must have used to scent her clothes before fleeing. Human smells. Living smells. "I'm sorry," she gasped between sobs. "I'm not usually. Cry all you need," he said. "God knows these mountains have heard enough of my tears over the years." When her sobs finally quieted, she didn't pull away immediately. Neither did he. They sat there, two damaged souls sharing warmth, while a new life slept between them and the sun climbed higher over a world made new by storm. "What happens now?" Mary asked eventually. Josiah looked out at the pristine snow, then at the woman and child who'd taken shelter in his life. "Now we keep you both alive and warm. Everything else can wait." But even as he said it, he knew that wasn't entirely true. Thomas Walsh would come, or send men to come. The snow wouldn't stop a determined search party forever. And then there would be choices to make, stands to take. For now, though, there was this moment, sunlight streaming through the window, a baby's soft breathing, the simple miracle of survival. Josiah had learned to take such moments when they came, to hold them against the darker times. "Thank you," Mary said again, and he knew she meant for more than just the shelter and the help with Hope's birth. "Rest now," he said, standing carefully so as not to jostle them. "I need to check the animals, make sure they weathered the storm." But before he could move away, Mary caught his hand. "Josiah, what you said about your mother, about bringing life into the world instead of taking it out, I think she'd be proud of what you did last night." He squeezed her hand gently, then pulled away, needing the cold air and the simple tasks of survival to steady himself. As he pulled on his coat and prepared to face the aftermath of the storm, he heard Mary humming softly to Hope, a lullaby he didn't recognize, but that sounded like every lullaby ever sung, full of love and hope and the fierce promise of protection. The mountains had sent him a test disguised as a gift, or perhaps a gift disguised as a test. Either way, his simple, solitary life had ended the moment he'd found those desperate footprints in the snow. What would replace it remained to be seen, but for the first time in 6 years, Josiah McKenna found himself curious about tomorrow. 3 days had passed since Hope's birth, and the snow showed no signs of melting. If anything, the cold had deepened, turning the white blanket into a crust of ice that crackled underfoot. Josiah had managed to dig paths to the woodpile and the small shed where he kept his mule and supplies. But beyond that, the world remained locked away. Inside the cabin, a fragile routine had developed. Mary was recovering slowly, still weak but able to move about for short periods. Hope seemed to be thriving despite her early arrival, nursing well and sleeping in the irregular patterns of all newborns. Josiah had fashioned a crude cradle from a wooden crate, lining it with rabbit fur to keep her warm. But their food was running low. Josiah had supplies for one person to last the winter, not 3. The venison was nearly gone, and while he had flour and dried beans, a nursing mother needed better nourishment than that. "I need to hunt," he announced that morning, checking his rifle and loading his possible bag with ammunition and emergency supplies. Mary looked up from where she was changing Hope's makeshift diaper, torn from one of Josiah's older shirts. "Is it safe? The snow?" "I know the trails, even buried as they are. There's a valley about 2 miles east where the elk shelter. If I leave now, I can be back before dark." She nodded, but he could see the fear in her eyes. Fear of being alone. Fear of him not returning. Fear of what might come while he was gone. "Bar the door behind me," he instructed. "Don't open it for anyone but me. Anyone. You understand?" "Yes." She shifted Hope to her other arm, the baby's face peaceful in sleep. "Be careful." Josiah stepped out into the crystalline morning, the cold hitting his lungs like a physical blow. The world was silent except for the crunch of his boots breaking through the ice crust. He moved carefully, testing each step, his rifle ready. He'd made it perhaps a mile when he saw them, fresh tracks crossing his path. Horse tracks, at least 3 riders, heading up the mountain from the direction of Beaver Creek. His blood ran cold. No one traveled these mountains in weather like this without serious purpose. Josiah crouched behind a fallen log, studying the tracks. They were maybe 6 hours old, made during the night. The riders were moving slowly, carefully, but with determination. Following the creek bed up toward his cabin, he abandoned the hunt immediately, turning back the way he'd come, moving as quickly as he dared. His mind raced through possibilities. It could be trappers, but unlikely. Everyone he knew would be holed up in this weather. Could be Indians, but the local UTEs had moved to their winter camps weeks ago. That left Thomas Walsh's men. Josiah picked up his pace, half sliding down a slope in his haste. He had to get back, had to. The crack of a rifle shot echoed across the mountains, followed by another. The sounds came from the direction of his cabin. He ran then, abandoning all caution, crashing through drifts that came up to his thighs. His lungs burned with the cold air. His legs screamed protest, but he pushed harder. Images flashed through his mind. Mary trying to hold the door, Hope crying, men breaking through. He burst into the clearing to see his worst fears partially realized. 3 horses stood tethered outside his cabin, steam rising from their flanks. The door was still closed, thank God, but he could hear voices, rough male voices, demanding entry. "We know you're in there. Mary, your husband wants you home. You've caused enough trouble." "Woman!" Josiah circled wide, using the trees for cover, until he could see the men clearly. 3 of them, all armed, all focused on the cabin. He recognized the type hired thugs, the kind who did dirty work for men like Walsh. One was trying to peer through the window while the other 2 stood by the door. "Come on out peaceful-like," one called. "No need to make this harder than it needs to be. You know you can't stay in there forever." Josiah raised his rifle, sighting on the man at the window. At this range, he couldn't miss, but killing them would bring more trouble. More men. He needed them gone. Not dead. Not yet. He fired into the air, the shot echoing like thunder across the clearing. All 3 men spun, grabbing for their weapons. "That's far enough," Josiah called, stepping partially into view, rifle trained on the nearest man. "This is private property. You boys are trespassing." "Well now," the largest of the 3 said, a bearded brute with small, mean eyes. "You must be the mountain man who's been harboring another man's wife." "I'm the man who's telling you to get on your horses and ride out," Josiah replied evenly. "Now." Can't do that, friend. We've been paid to bring the woman back. Her husband's mighty worried about her. Her husband's a bastard who beats women, Josiah said flatly. She's not going anywhere with you. The men exchanged glances. The one by the window, younger than the others, with a nervous twitch, spoke up. Mister, you don't know what you're getting into. Thomas Walsh is an important man. He's got friends, influence. You can't just, I can and I am. Josiah shifted his aim to the young one. You seem smarter than your friends. Smart enough to know I can drop at least 2 of you before you clear leather. Maybe all 3. These mountains are full of places to hide bodies. No one would ever know what happened to you. It was a bluff, partially. He could certainly take 2, probably 3, but not without risk, and killing them would indeed bring more trouble. But they didn't need to know that. The bearded one hawked and spat into the snow. You're making a mistake, mountain man. Walsh don't forget, and he don't forgive. Then he and I have something in common. Josiah's voice was cold as the wind. Get on your horses. Don't come back. Tell Walsh his wife died in the storm. Tell him whatever you want. But if I see any of you on my mountain again, you won't leave it alive. A long moment passed, tension crackling in the air like ice breaking. Finally, the bearded one nodded to the others. Come on, boys. We'll be back with more men. They mounted up, the horses protesting the cold and the deep snow. Josiah kept his rifle trained on them until they were out of sight, then waited another 10 minutes to be sure they weren't circling back. Only then did he approach the cabin. Mary, it's me. It's safe. He heard the bar being lifted, and the door opened a crack. Mary's face appeared, pale and frightened but determined. She held one of his skinning knives in her hand. They're gone, he assured her, stepping inside and barring the door again. For now. She sagged against the wall, the knife clattering to the floor. I thought, when I heard the shots, just warning shots, needed to get their attention. He set his rifle by the door, noting how his hands shook slightly from the adrenaline. They'll be back, though, with more men, like they said. Mary picked up Hope, who had started crying during the confrontation. Then we need to leave. I can't bring this trouble to you. You've done enough. Stop. Josiah's voice was firm. You can't travel. Not yet. Hope's too young, too fragile for a journey in this weather. And where would you go? Back to town? They'd just take you back to him. Then what do we do? Josiah looked around his small cabin, this refuge he'd built to escape the world. Now the world had found him anyway, in the form of a young woman and her baby who needed protection. We prepare, he said. This cabin's built solid, and I know these mountains better than anyone Walsh might send. They want to fight. They'll get one. You'd do that. Fight for us. We're nothing to you. Stop saying that. He turned to face her fully. You're not nothing. You're a woman who risked everything to save her child. That means something. It has to mean something, or nothing does. Mary's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. I don't know how to fight. You fought to get here. You fought to bring hope into the world. You've been fighting your whole life, from what I can see. He moved to his trunk, pulling out an old Navy Colt revolver. But if you mean fighting with guns, I can teach you that too. She looked at the weapon with a mix of fear and fascination. Thomas never let me near his guns, said women had no business with such things. Thomas is a fool, Josiah said simply. Out here, knowing how to protect yourself isn't a luxury. It's survival. As if to emphasize his point, a wolf howled in the distance, answered by another. The predators were out there, both animal and human. But inside the cabin, the fire burned warm, and 3 souls made their own small stand against the wilderness. Josiah began teaching Mary to load the revolver, her hands steady despite everything. Hope slept on, oblivious to the dangers circling their small sanctuary. Outside, snow began to fall again, as if the mountains themselves were trying to hide them from the world. But Josiah knew better. The mountains could shelter you, but they couldn't fight your battles. That would come down to will, skill, and luck. He'd need all three to keep his promise to protect this woman and child who'd stumbled into his life and awakened something he'd thought dead forever. The wolves howled again. Closer now. Hunting. Just like the men who would return. Let them come, Josiah thought, watching Mary practice with determined concentration. They'd find more than they bargained for. A mountain man, a desperate mother, and a baby named Hope. Not much of an army. But sometimes that's all it took to make a stand worth making. The attack came on the 5th night, in the dead hours when the cold bit deepest and vigilance wavered. Josiah had been expecting it, had spent the days since the first visit preparing. He'd set snares along the obvious approaches, cached ammunition in strategic spots around the cabin, and taught Mary the basics of defense. But knowing something was coming didn't make it easier when it arrived. The first sign was the mule braying in the shed, a sound of pure alarm that cut through the pre-dawn darkness. Josiah was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, peering through the gap he'd left in the window shutter. "They're here," he whispered to Mary, who was already awake, clutching Hope to her chest. Shadows moved against the snow, many more than 3 this time. Josiah counted at least 8 men spreading out to surround the cabin. They moved with more caution than the first group, having learned that the mountain man wasn't to be taken lightly. "Remember what I taught you," Josiah said quietly, handing Mary the loaded Colt. "Stay low. Keep Hope in the corner we prepared. Don't fire unless they get inside." She nodded, her face pale but set with determination. In the 5 days since the first confrontation, something had hardened in her, the steel that had always been there now showing through. A voice called out from the darkness, not the bearded thug from before, but a smoother, more cultured tone that made Mary stiffen with recognition. "Mary, my dear wife, I've come to take you home." Thomas Walsh himself. Josiah had hoped the man would send others to do his dirty work, but apparently, the insult of his wife's escape had been too great to delegate. "I know you're in there," Walsh continued, his voice carrying that particular tone of a man used to being obeyed. "And I know the mountain man is with you. Come out now, and I might let him live. Make me come in after you, and I'll gut him like a deer while you watch." "Go to hell, Thomas," Mary called back, surprising Josiah with the venom in her voice. A harsh laugh answered her. "Such language from my gentle wife. What has this savage done to you? Mary, filled your head with ideas, made you forget your place." Josiah eased the shutter open a fraction wider, trying to spot Walsh among the shadows, there, standing behind a thick pine, only partially visible. The man was tall, well-dressed even for a mountain raid, his pale face visible in the moonlight. "Your wife came here of her own will," Josiah called out, "running from a man who beats women and threatens babies. Any place she had in your life, you destroyed yourself. Ah, the mountain man speaks." Walsh's voice dripped contempt. "Tell me, hermit, what kind of man interferes between a husband and wife? What kind of man harbors a runaway woman? The kind that's about to put a bullet in you if you don't turn around and leave." Walsh laughed again. 8 men against 1. I like my odds. Your men have to cross 30 yards of open ground to reach this cabin. Josiah replied calmly, "I can drop 4 before they make it halfway, maybe 5. You willing to be one of them?" Silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Josiah could almost hear Walsh calculating, weighing pride against prudence. Then everything erupted at once. "Take the cabin!" Walsh roared, and his men charged from multiple directions. Josiah's first shot took the lead man's center mass, dropping him into the snow. He worked the lever, fired again. Another man spinning and falling, but there were too many, coming too fast. He heard Mary's Colt boom once, twice, saw another attacker stumble at the window. Something crashed against the door, a shoulder, a boot. The bar held, but it wouldn't for long. Josiah fired through the door, heard a scream, kept firing. Smoke filled the cabin, acrid and blinding. A window shattered, a man trying to climb through. Mary shot him point blank, her face grim as powder smoke. Hope wailed, the sound thin and terrified beneath the gunfire. The door splintered, the bar cracking. Josiah grabbed the shotgun he'd loaded with buckshot, waited for the first man through the breach. The blast in the confined space was deafening. The result, devastating. But more kept coming. A man lunged at Mary. She tried to bring the Colt up, but he was too fast, too close. Josiah couldn't get a clear shot without risking her. Then Mary did something unexpected. She slammed the heavy revolver into the man's temple, dropping him cold. "Behind you!" she screamed. Josiah spun, firing from the hip at a figure coming through the window. The man fell back, clutching his shoulder. How many were down? How many left? The smoke made it impossible to tell. Then, suddenly, the attack faltered. The remaining men pulled back, dragging wounded comrades. Josiah counted 3 bodies in the snow, saw at least 2 others being helped away. "Enough!" Walsh's voice, no longer smooth, raw with rage. "Burn it! Burn the damn cabin! Smoke them out!" Josiah's blood ran cold. Fire was the mountain man's greatest fear, especially in winter when everything was dry as tinder inside. He heard the splash of coal oil against the walls, smelled its sharp tang. "The root cellar," he said urgently to Mary. "Take Hope. Get down there now. What about you? Go!" He pushed aside the rug, revealing the trap door he'd cut years ago for storing preserves. "There's a tunnel, leads out to the woodshed. Take Hope and run. I'm not leaving you." The first flames licked at the walls, orange tongues tasting the logs. Smoke began to pour in through the broken windows. "You have to, for Hope." He grabbed her shoulders, looked into her eyes. "I'll hold them off. Give you time. Get to the shed, take the mule, ride for the Ute camp at Willow Creek. They'll help you." "Josiah, go, now!" She looked at him one last moment, something passing between them that neither had words for. Then she was gone, down into the darkness with Hope clutched to her chest. Josiah slammed the trapdoor shut, pulled the rug back over it. The flames were spreading fast, too fast. The cabin that had been his refuge for 5 years was becoming a death trap. But he wasn't done fighting. He kicked open what remained of the door, firing as he came out. The smoke and flames at his back made him a difficult target, and Walsh's men were clustered together. Perfect targets for a desperate man with nothing left to lose. His rifle clicked empty. He drew his knife, the long blade Sarah had given him for their first anniversary, and charged the nearest man. They went down together in the snow, rolling, fighting. Josiah's greater strength and mountain-hardened muscles gave him the edge. The man stopped moving. He came up to find Thomas Walsh pointing a pearl-handled revolver at his chest. "Where is she?" Walsh demanded. His composed mask finally cracked, revealing the monster beneath. Josiah smiled, tasting blood from a split lip. "Gone. Somewhere you'll never find her. I'll track her. I'll hunt her to the ends of the earth." "No," Josiah said simply. "You won't." He moved then, faster than Walsh expected. The pearl-handled gun fired. Josiah felt the burn across his ribs, but his momentum carried him forward. His knife found its mark, sliding between ribs with a lifetime of butchering game behind it. Walsh's eyes went wide with shock. He looked down at the knife handle protruding from his chest, then back at Josiah. You savage!" "Just a man," Josiah corrected. "A man who keeps his promises." Walsh fell to his knees, then forward into the snow. The remaining men, only 2 or 3 now, backed away, leaderless and frightened. One called out, "The woman ain't worth dying for, boys. Let's get out of here." They fled, taking their wounded, leaving their dead, leaving Thomas Walsh face down in the reddening snow. Josiah stood alone in the clearing, his cabin a pillar of flame behind him, his side bleeding freely. But he was alive, and more importantly, Mary and Hope had gotten away. He could see the mule's tracks leading away from the shed, could picture them riding hard for safety. He pressed his hand to his wounded side, began walking, not toward Beaver Creek or any settlement, but deeper into the mountains. He knew a cave, high up, where a man could shelter, where he could heal or die in peace. As he walked, he thought he heard something on the wind, a baby's cry, perhaps, or just the echo of memory. But when he looked back, all he saw was his burning past and the bodies of those who'd tried to own what couldn't be owned. The mountains welcomed him back into their silence, and Josiah McKenna disappeared into the white wilderness, leaving only footprints that the next snowfall would erase forever. The cave was cold and damp, but it was shelter. Josiah had dragged himself up the mountain through the pre-dawn darkness, leaving a trail of blood that the falling snow gradually covered. His side burned where Walsh's bullet had gouged a furrow across his ribs. Not fatal, but bad enough to weaken him with every step. He'd made it to the cave as the sun rose, collapsing just inside the entrance. Years ago, he'd stashed emergency supplies here, flint and steel, some dried meat, a bear skin, enough to survive, if infection didn't take him first. For 3 days he drifted between consciousness and fever dreams. He saw Sarah and Emma, beckoning him to follow. He saw Mary and Hope, riding through the snow. He saw Thomas Walsh, rising from the bloodied snow with Josiah's knife still in his chest. But each time the darkness reached for him, something pulled him back. A promise, perhaps, or simple stubborn refusal to die in a cave like a wounded animal. On the 4th day, his fever broke. He woke to find the storm had passed, leaving the world crystalline and still. His wound had stopped bleeding, starting to scab over. He was weak as a newborn colt, but alive. That's when he heard the horses. Josiah forced himself to the cave entrance, expecting Walsh's remaining men come to finish the job. But the riders picking their way up the narrow trail weren't white men. 3 Ute warriors, faces painted for winter hunting, moving with the easy grace of those born to these mountains. He recognized the lead rider, Standing Elk, a man he'd traded with many times over the years. The Ute saw him at the same moment, raising a hand in greeting. "McKenna," Standing Elk called in accented English. "We follow blood trail. Think to find dead white man. Find you instead." "Not dead yet," Josiah croaked, his throat dry as dust. Standing Elk dismounted, studying Josiah's wound with experienced eyes. "You fight. Many dead white men in valley below. Your cabin burned. Had to be done." The Ute nodded, understanding without needing details. His people knew about men like Thomas Walsh, had suffered from their kind often enough. "Woman and baby come to our camp," Standing Elk said, and Josiah's heart leaped. "She say you save them. Tell her find us. My wife tend to them. They're all right. Woman strong, baby small but fierce. Both live." Standing Elk gestured to his companions. "We take you to camp. Our medicine woman fix you better." Josiah wanted to refuse, to maintain his solitary existence, but he was too weak to survive alone. And more than that, Mary and Hope were at the Ute camp. The thought of seeing them again, of knowing for certain they were safe, overcame his hermit's instincts. The ride down the mountain was agony, every jostle of the horse sending fire through his side, but Standing Elk rode close, steadying him when he swayed. The Ute had no reason to help him beyond past trading relationships. Yet here they were, showing more humanity than many of his own kind. The winter camp lay in a sheltered valley where hot springs kept the worst of the cold at bay. Smoke rose from a dozen lodges, and children played in the snow despite the cold. It was a scene of such normal life that Josiah felt tears prick his eyes. Then he saw her. Mary emerged from one of the lodges, Hope bundled in her arms. She was wearing Ute clothing, a doeskin dress and fur robe, but he would have known her anywhere. Her face, when she saw him, transformed with joy and relief. "Josiah!" She ran to him as Standing Elk helped him down from the horse. "I thought we heard the gunshots, saw the smoke. I wanted to go back, but—" "You did right," he said, swaying on his feet. "Did exactly right." She saw his bloodied side then, her face paling. "You're hurt. I've had worse." It was a lie, but a necessary one. The next hours blurred together. The medicine woman, a stern elder named Singing Bird, cleaned and packed his wound with herbs that burned like fire but dulled the pain. Mary hovered nearby. Hope in a cradle board one of the Ute women had given her. Later, as night fell and the camp settled into evening routines. Josiah found himself in Standing Elk's lodge, propped against willow backrests, sipping a bitter tea that made his head swim pleasantly. Mary sat beside him, Hope nursing contentedly. "Tell me," he said simply. Mary's story came in pieces. The terrifying ride through the darkness. Hope crying. The mule struggling through the drifts. Finding the Ute camp as dawn broke. Trying to communicate with her handful of English words and desperate gestures. The kindness of the women who took her in. Asked no questions. Simply offered shelter. "They told me what such men do to women," she said quietly. "They understood without my having to explain everything. Standing Elk says Walsh is dead." Josiah said, "Yes." Her voice was steady. "I'm not sorry. Does that make me wicked? Makes you human." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire. Around them, the normal sounds of the camp children being put to bed, men discussing the day's hunt, women laughing over some shared joke. Community. Something Josiah had avoided for so long he'd forgotten its warmth. "What happens now?" Mary asked eventually. Josiah had been wondering the same thing. His cabin was gone, his solitary life destroyed. Walsh was dead. But there would be questions, investigations. A rich man didn't die without consequences, even if he deserved it. "California," he said suddenly, surprising himself. "I've got gold hidden away, enough to start fresh. Buy a little ranch, maybe. Somewhere nobody knows us." "Us?" Mary's voice was carefully neutral. Josiah looked at her then. Really looked. This young woman who'd been through hell and come out stronger. Who'd trusted him with her life and her daughter's life. Who sat beside him now like it was the most natural thing in the world. "If you'll have me," he said. "I know I'm not much to look at. Older than you by 15 years at least. Set in my ways. But I'd be good to you. Mary, to both of you. I'd never raise a hand except to protect you." Mary's eyes filled with tears. "Josiah McKenna, you saved our lives. You fought for us, bled for us. You think I care about years or looks?" She reached out, took his hand. "I've seen what handsome young men can become. I'd rather have a good man, regardless of age." Hope stirred in her mother's arms, making small sounds. Josiah reached out tentatively, let the baby grasp his finger. Such tiny hands, but such a strong grip. "California," Mary said, testing the word. "I've heard it's beautiful there. Warm, orange trees and ocean breezes. Far from here," Josiah added. "Far from memories." "Some memories I want to keep," Mary said softly. And he knew she meant these last days. The connection forged in crisis. Standing Elk entered then, bringing news. Soldiers come to burned cabin. Find bodies. They look for woman, but snow covers tracks. They think maybe you all die in fire. It was better than Josiah had hoped. If the authorities thought them dead, there would be no pursuit. They could truly start fresh. "We'll stay here until you're healed," Mary said firmly. "The women are teaching me their medicine, their ways. Hope is thriving. When spring comes, we'll go to California." Josiah nodded, exhaustion pulling at him. But it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came from surviving what should have killed you, from finding unexpected grace in the midst of violence. As he drifted toward sleep, he heard Mary singing softly to Hope, not a lullaby he recognized, but something the Ute women must have taught her. The fire crackled. The lodge was warm, and for the first time in 6 years, Josiah McKenna didn't feel alone. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the tracks of the past, preparing the world for spring and whatever came after. In the lodge, 3 souls who had found each other in the wilderness settled in for the night, a makeshift family forged in fire and storm, looking toward a future none of them could have imagined just days before. The mountains had taken everything from him once. Now, in their harsh way, they had given him something back. Not what he'd lost, but something new. Something worth the price he'd paid to find it. Spring came to the Colorado mountains like a shy bride, hesitant at first, then blooming with sudden courage. The snow retreated day by day, revealing the earth beneath scarred in places from the winter's violence, but ready for new growth. Wildflowers pushed through the mud, painting the meadows in waves of color that made Mary gasp with wonder the first time she saw them. They had wintered with the Utes, becoming part of the camp's rhythm. Josiah's wound had healed clean, leaving only a puckered scar to remind him of that night. Mary had blossomed in the company of the women, learning their crafts, their medicines, their way of seeing the world. Hope had grown strong and fat, passed from arm to arm in the communal way of the tribe, loved by many mothers. But now it was time to leave. Standing Elk helped them prepare for the journey, trading Josiah's hidden gold for horses, supplies, and safe passage through tribal territories. The parting was bittersweet in a few short months. The Utes had become more family than either Josiah or Mary had known in years. "You always welcome here," Standing Elk said as they prepared to depart. "Mountains remember those who respect them." Singing Bird, the medicine woman, pressed a small leather pouch into Mary's hands. "For the little one," she said in her limited English. "Protection for journey." Mary's eyes filled with tears as she embraced the older woman. These people had asked nothing of them, had sheltered them simply because it was right. Such kindness seemed almost foreign after the life she'd known. They set out on a morning when the sky stretched endless and blue, their small party consisting of Josiah, Mary, Hope in her cradleboard, and 2 pack horses laden with everything they owned. It wasn't much by some standards, but it was more than either had dared hope for months ago. The journey would take them through the Great Basin, across the Sierra Nevada, and finally to the California valleys where orange groves were said to bloom year-round. Josiah had plotted their route carefully, avoiding main trails where questions might be asked, sticking to paths he'd learned from other mountain men and friendly tribes. As they rode, Mary marveled at the changing landscape. She'd lived her whole life in small towns, confined spaces, limited horizons. Now the world opened before her, vast and wild, each vista more breathtaking than the last. "I never knew it could be so big," she said one evening as they camped by a crystal stream, the sunset painting the distant peaks in shades of rose and gold. "Most folks never see it." Josiah replied, adjusting the rabbit he was roasting over their small fire. "They stay in their towns, their safe places, never knowing what's out here. I was one of them," Mary said softly. "Would have lived and died in Cedar Ridge if—" She trailed off, then continued more firmly. "No, that's not right. I'd have died in Cedar Ridge, but I wouldn't have lived. Not really." "Sss," Hope gurgled from her makeshift cradle, a clever arrangement of bent willows and soft firs that Josiah had crafted. She was trying to grab at the dancing firelight, her dark eyes bright with baby curiosity. "She'll grow up free," Mary said, watching her daughter, "never knowing what it means to be owned, to be less than. That's worth everything we went through." Josiah nodded, understanding. Freedom wasn't just the absence of chains. It was the presence of choice, of possibility. Out here, under the vast sky, they had both. They encountered few people on their journey. Once, a party of 49ers heading back east. Their California dreams turned to dust. Another time, a Mexican trader with his family, who shared their fire and stories of the trail ahead. Each meeting was brief, cordial, with no questions asked about their relationship or their destination. The frontier had its own code: mind your business, help when needed, move on. It was near the Nevada border when they decided to make it official. They'd come upon a small mining camp with a traveling preacher, the kind who married folks and buried them with equal enthusiasm. The ceremony was simple, a few words spoken over a Bible worn soft with use, a pine ring Josiah had carved during their evenings by the fire, Mary in her doe-skin dress with Hope in her arms. "Do you, Josiah McKenna, take this woman to be your lawful wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you, Mary Catherine Walsh, Mary Catherine McKenna?" she interrupted firmly. "Just McKenna." The preacher smiled. "Do you, Mary Catherine McKenna, take this man to be your lawful wedded husband?" "I do." And like that, they were family in the eyes of God and law. The miners whooped and fired their guns in the air. Someone produced a fiddle, and there was dancing under the stars. For one night, They were just another couple starting a new life in the West, their past erased by distance and determination. California, when they finally crested the Sierra Nevada and saw it spread below them, was everything they'd hoped and more. Golden hills rolled toward a distant blue line that Josiah said was the ocean. The air smelled different here, sage and sea salt and possibility. They found their place in a valley 30 miles inland from San Francisco, far enough from the gold fields to avoid the chaos, close enough to civilization to sell their crops. The land had a small cabin already started by someone who'd given up, and a well with sweet water. There were oak trees for shade and fertile soil for planting. Home, Mary breathed, sliding down from her horse with hope in her arms. Josiah looked at the cabin, barely more than a foundation and 2 walls, then at the woman beside him. "It's not much yet. It's perfect," she said firmly. "We'll build it together, make it ours." And they did. Through that first California summer, they worked side by side. Josiah's mountain skills translated well to farming and building, while Mary proved to have a gift for growing things. Their garden flourished. The cabin walls rose straight and true, and Hope learned to crawl in the soft grass under the oak trees. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings, they'd talk about the journey that brought them together, the terror of that winter storm, the violence that had freed them, the kindness of strangers who'd sheltered them. It seemed like another lifetime, though only months had passed. "Do you miss it?" Mary asked one evening as they sat on their new porch, watching the sunset paint their valley gold. The mountains, the solitude. Josiah considered, bouncing Hope on his knee. The baby laughed, reaching for his beard with chubby fingers. "Thought I would," he admitted. "Thought I needed that loneliness like air. But turns out I was just hiding." "From what?" "From this." He gestured at their small homestead. At her, at Hope. "From the chance of losing again. Seemed easier to have nothing than to risk everything." Mary reached over, took his free hand. "And now? Now I figure the risk is worth it. Has to be, or we might as well be dead already." Hope had fallen asleep, trusting and peaceful in a way that still amazed both of them. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, answered by another. The sound didn't frighten them anymore. It was just part of the tapestry of their new life. "I was thinking," Mary said eventually, "about what Hope's going to need. Education, other children to play with. There's a town about 5 miles east. They're looking for a school teacher. You want to teach? I want to help other girls learn to read, to write, to think for themselves, to know they have choices." Her voice held that steel he'd first glimpsed in the cabin. "I couldn't save Grace, but maybe I can save others." Josiah squeezed her hand. "Then that's what we'll do." They went inside as the air cooled, Josiah barring the door out of habit, though there was nothing to fear here. Their bedroom was simple but clean. Hope's cradle nearby where they could hear her if she woke. As they prepared for bed, Mary hummed that Ute lullaby she'd learned, the melody floating through their small home like a blessing. "Thank you," she said suddenly, turning to face him in the lamplight. "For what?" "For stopping that day, for opening your door, for keeping your promise." She moved closer, her hand touching the scar on his ribs. "For everything." "Thank you," he replied, "for reminding me how to live." They blew out the lamp, settling into bed as they had for months now, no longer strangers brought together by crisis, but partners chosen through trial. Outside, the California night sang its different song, crickets instead of wolves, ocean breeze instead of mountain wind. But inside their small home, 3 hearts beat in rhythm, safe and whole and free. In the morning, there would be work, always work on a frontier homestead. The garden to tend, the cabin to finish, a life to build piece by piece. But for now, there was this, the warmth of another person beside him, the soft breathing of a child who would never know fear as her mother had, and the vast peace of a future stretching ahead unmarked and full of promise. The mountains had taught Josiah McKenna to survive. Mary and Hope had taught him to live. together. They'd learned that sometimes the greatest courage isn't in facing death, but in choosing life, messy, uncertain, glorious life, despite all the reasons not to. As sleep took him, Josiah thought he heard Sarah's voice on the wind, not calling him away anymore, but wishing him well. The past would always be part of him, but it no longer owned him. He was, at last, home. Thank you all for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect with fellow Wild West story lovers from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Josiah and Mary's journey. What part of their story touched you the most?